A poor girl arrived without makeup at the interview. Billionaire CEO chose her among 25 candidates. Every head turned toward her, 25 sets of judgmental eyes, taking inventory of her flaws. She caught whispers about her shoes, her bag, her obvious lack of everything they possessed. But Cole's eyes never left her face, and something in his gaze made her stand straighter. Have you ever walked into a room knowing you didn't belong? Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. 25 Ivy League graduates sat in perfect rows, their resumes gleaming like armor, until she walked in with cracked shoes and a $3 tote bag, about to expose the lie that would bring down an empire. Have you ever walked into a room knowing you didn't belong? Felt every eye judging your clothes, your background, your worth? That's exactly what happened to Naomi Carter on a Thursday morning in Atlanta that would change everything. The glass towers of Nimbus Corporation stretched 40 stories into the Georgia sky, reflecting clouds that looked cleaner than anything Naomi had ever owned. She clutched her thrift store tote bag tighter, the plastic handles already cutting into her palm. Inside that bag was everything she owned that mattered: a printed resume on cheap paper, her grandmother's lucky pen, and a protein bar she couldn't afford to eat until after the interview. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like ascending into another world. Each floor that passed showed glimpses of wealth she'd only seen in movies. Marble lobbies, fresh flowers in crystal vases, people in suits that cost more than her rent. By floor 30, her stomach was doing gymnastics. By floor 40, she was questioning every decision that led her here. The boardroom doors opened to reveal a space that belonged in architectural magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Atlanta's skyline like a painting worth millions. The conference table stretched longer than her entire apartment, surrounded by chairs that probably cost more than her car, if she still had one. 25 candidates sat in those chairs, each one looking like they stepped off the cover of Business Weekly. Harvard blazers, Princeton ties, Yale confidence radiating from every perfectly groomed face. Their leather portfolios lay precisely positioned, their posture screaming success before they'd even opened their mouths. Then there was Naomi, 5 minutes late because the bus broke down, wearing a blazer from Goodwill that didn't quite match her pants, and shoes with cracks she tried to color in with black marker. Her portfolio was a manila folder held together with hope and determination. Cole Matthews stood at the head of the table, and even from across the room, his presence hit her like electricity. 38 years old with the kind of confidence that comes from building empires before most people finish college. His dark suit fit him like it was sewn onto his body, and when his eyes met hers across that intimidating space, something shifted in her chest that had nothing to do with nerves. "Miss Carter, I presume?" His voice carried the slight rasp of someone who'd spent late nights building dreams into reality. "You're the final candidate." Every head turned toward her, 25 sets of judgmental eyes taking inventory of her flaws. She caught whispers about her shoes, her bag, her obvious lack of everything they possessed. But Cole's eyes never left her face, and something in his gaze made her stand straighter. "Yes, sir," she replied, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Sorry I'm late. Transit issues." A few candidates exchanged smirks. Transit issues. How pedestrian. How poor. Cole gestured to the one empty chair at the far end of the table, the hot seat positioned so everyone could watch her squirm. As she walked toward it, her worn flats squeaked against the polished floor, each step announcing her inadequacy to the room. But something strange happened as she sat down. Instead of shrinking under their stares, she felt a familiar fire kindle in her chest. The same determination that had gotten her through 2 jobs while finishing her degree, through nights when dinner was crackers and hope, through every person who'd ever told her she wasn't good enough. Cole began his introduction, explaining the position: Chief Technology Innovation Officer, a role that would reshape how the company approached artificial intelligence development. The salary made her dizzy. The responsibilities made her heart race. The opportunity made her forget about her cracked shoes entirely. The position requires someone who can think differently, Cole continued, his gaze sweeping the room. Someone who can see solutions where others see problems. Someone who isn't afraid to challenge conventional wisdom. As he spoke, Naomi found herself leaning forward, captivated not just by the job description, but by the man delivering it. There was something magnetic about his confidence, the way he commanded attention without demanding it. His hands moved expressively as he talked, and she noticed he wasn't wearing a wedding ring, a detail that shouldn't have mattered but somehow did. The first round of questions began, each candidate delivering polished responses that sounded rehearsed and empty. They spoke in corporate buzzwords and consultant speak, saying nothing while using impressive vocabulary. Naomi listened, taking notes in her grandmother's careful handwriting style, and began to notice patterns in their answers. Then Cole asked a question that changed everything. Ethics scenario. Your biggest client asks you to modify data in a report to make their quarterly projections look better. The modification wouldn't technically be illegal, but it would mislead investors. What do you do? The responses were predictable. Talk to supervisors. Consider company policy. Weigh the business implications. 24 variations of the same corporate dance around a real answer. Then it was candidate 25's turn. Marcus Whitman, perfectly groomed with a portfolio that gleamed like his Harvard credentials. He smiled confidently as he delivered his response about balancing stakeholder interests and finding creative solutions that serve everyone. But Naomi was staring at his portfolio, her mind racing. Those quarterly projections he'd referenced in his presentation earlier. She'd seen those numbers before. In the company's public filings, she'd studied obsessively to prepare for this interview. The numbers didn't match. Her heart hammered as she realized what she was seeing. This wasn't just a hypothetical ethics question for Marcus. It was his actual strategy. And he was sitting in this room, interviewing for a position of trust after potentially manipulating financial data. 24 candidates had given safe, non-committal answers to Cole's ethics question. Marcus had given a dishonest one, and now it was her turn. Cole's eyes found hers across the table. Ms. Carter, how do you handle the ethics scenario? The room fell silent. 25 sets of eyes focused on the girl with cracked shoes who was about to make a decision that would either end her dreams or change her life forever. She looked at Marcus, then at Cole, then at the portfolio full of numbers that didn't add up. In that moment, she had a choice. Play it safe and blend in, or trust her instincts and speak the truth that could destroy someone else's chances while potentially ruining her own. Drop a comment if you've ever felt like the outsider in a room full of privilege. What would you do if you knew you were being judged before you even spoke? Naomi took a breath that felt like jumping off a cliff. You tell the truth, she said simply. Because integrity isn't negotiable, and investors deserve accurate information to make informed decisions. But sir, she raised her trembling hand, knowing her next words would change everything. I think we might have a real-world example of this scenario sitting right here in this room. The silence that followed was deafening. Cole leaned forward, his expression intense. Explain. She had 5 seconds to decide. Stay silent and safe, or speak up and risk it all. She raised her trembling hand in a room full of Harvard MBAs, knowing her next words would either end her dreams or expose the biggest fraud in corporate Atlanta. Have you ever had to choose between keeping quiet to save yourself or speaking truth to protect others? What did you choose? That's the impossible situation Naomi faced as 25 pairs of eyes stared at her like she'd lost her mind. The quarterly projections in portfolio number 25, Naomi continued, her voice gaining strength despite her racing heart. The numbers don't match Nimbus Corporation's actual public filings from last quarter. Someone's been playing with data that could mislead investors by millions. The room exploded into chaos. Gasps, whispers, and shocked murmurs filled the pristine boardroom. Marcus Whitman's face drained of color, his perfectly practiced composure cracking like ice under pressure. That's impossible, Marcus stammered, clutching his portfolio tighter. These are standard projections based on inflated revenue figures. Naomi interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. She pulled out her own notes, written on notebook paper that looked pathetic next to their leather-bound presentations. I studied your company's SEC filings for 3 weeks preparing for this interview. The Q3 numbers you're showing indicate a 47% growth rate, but the actual filed reports show 31%. That's the 16-point discrepancy that would make investors think the company is performing significantly better than reality. Cole's expression shifted from surprise to dangerous focus. His voice dropped to that low timbre that made her pulse race. Mr. Whitman, do you have an explanation for this discrepancy? Marcus's designer suit suddenly looked like expensive armor failing to protect him. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. There must be some mistake. These numbers came directly from where? Cole's question cut through the air like a blade. The other candidates sat frozen, watching the drama unfold like spectators at a car accident. Some looked thrilled that Marcus was being exposed. Others seemed terrified they might be next. But all of them were staring at Naomi like she'd either committed career suicide or performed a miracle. Marcus fumbled through his portfolio, papers rustling as his hands shook. The numbers came from internal projections, forward-looking estimates based on anticipated performance improvements, which you presented as historical quarterly data, Cole said, his tone deadly calm. Ms. Carter, you mentioned SEC filings. Do you have those numbers with you? Naomi's heart hammered as she reached into her cheap tote bag, past the protein bar and Lucky Pen, to pull out a folder of printed pages. I brought copies of the last 6 quarters of filings. I wanted to understand the company's trajectory before interviewing. The other candidates exchanged glances. Who brings SEC filings to a job interview? But Cole's expression showed something that made her chest flutter. Respect. Show me, he said. She walked to the front of the room on unsteady legs, her cracked shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Every step felt like walking toward either salvation or destruction. At the head of the table, she spread out her printed pages next to Marcus's glossy portfolio. The numbers told the story in black and white. Marcus had systematically inflated every major metric: revenue, growth projections, client retention rates. The discrepancies weren't minor rounding errors. They were deliberate misrepresentations that could influence major investment decisions. Cole studied the documents with laser focus, his jaw tightening as the scope of the deception became clear. When he looked up at Marcus, the room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Everyone else, you're dismissed, Cole announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. Ms. Carter, Mr. Whitman, remain behind. We need to have a very private conversation. As 23 candidates filed out in stunned silence, Naomi caught fragments of whispered conversations. Did she just tank his chances? Holy shit, those numbers. She's either brilliant or insane. The boardroom doors closed with finality, leaving just the 3 of them in a vast space. Marcus looked like he might throw up, while Naomi felt like she was watching her life change in real time. She just wasn't sure if it was changing for better or worse. Cole walked slowly around the table, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Mr. Whitman, these aren't minor discrepancies. These are systematic alterations that could constitute securities fraud. How long have you been manipulating data? I wasn't manipulating anything. Marcus's voice cracked with desperation. These were projections, forward-looking estimates. It's standard practice to clearly label projections as projections, Cole interrupted. You presented this data as historical performance. That's not a mistake. That's intentional deception. Naomi stood frozen, watching the confrontation unfold. Part of her felt guilty for destroying someone's career, but a larger part felt vindicated. This was exactly why she'd spoken up. Investors deserved accurate information, and companies deserved ethical employees. Cole turned to her, his intense gaze making her skin warm despite the serious situation. Ms. Carter, how did you catch this? 24 other highly qualified candidates reviewed the same materials. They weren't looking for problems, she replied honestly. They were looking for ways to impress you. I was looking for ways to understand your business well enough to actually contribute to it. Something flickered in Cole's eyes. Surprise, appreciation, maybe something deeper. And you chose to speak up despite knowing it could hurt your chances? Yes, sir. Her voice was steadier now, confidence growing. Because if I got the job by staying silent about fraud, I wouldn't deserve it. And if you're the kind of CEO who would hire someone who stayed silent about fraud, then I wouldn't want to work here anyway. Marcus made a desperate sound. This is ridiculous. You're taking the word of some. He gestured at Naomi's modest appearance with obvious disdain. Somewhat. Cole's voice turned dangerously quiet. Marcus seemed to realize he was about to say something that would end his career even faster. I just mean, she's clearly trying to eliminate competition by making false accusations. False accusations? Cole picked up Naomi's printed SEC filings. These are public documents. The numbers don't lie, Mr. Whitman. The question is why you did. As Cole continued his interrogation, Naomi noticed something that made her blood run cold. Marcus was wearing a ring, a family signet ring with an elegant W engraved in the gold. The same W she'd seen on the nameplate outside the office of David Whitman, Cole's co-founder and business partner. Her stomach dropped as she realized what she'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about one candidate's dishonesty. This was about family connections, corporate politics, and power structures she'd never even considered. Marcus wasn't just any candidate. He was family, and she'd just declared war on the wrong bloodline. Share your story below if you've ever had to choose loyalty over self-preservation. What did you do when everything was on the line? As security escorted Marcus out of the building, his parting words echoed through the boardroom. This isn't over. My family built this company too. Cole turned to Naomi with an expression that made her heart race for all the wrong reasons. The empty boardroom suddenly felt intimate and dangerous. You just cost me my oldest friendship and possibly my company, he said quietly, his voice carrying undertones that made her skin tingle. The question is, are you worth it? Her answer would determine everything. The job, the investigation, and the dangerous attraction neither could ignore. The family ring on his finger wasn't just jewelry. It was a weapon pointed directly at the heart of Cole's empire, and Naomi had just pulled the trigger. What would you do if exposing the truth meant going to war with powerful people? Would you back down or double down? That's exactly what Naomi faced as Cole stared at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. The empty boardroom felt cavernous now, 40 stories above Atlanta with nothing but glass and steel between them and the world below. Evening shadows stretched across the polished conference table where Marcus's abandoned portfolio lay like evidence at a crime scene. Marcus Whitman, Cole said slowly, each word deliberate. David Whitman's nephew. My business partner's family. He loosened his tie with sharp, angry movements. Do you understand what you've done? Naomi's mouth went dry. I exposed fraud. That's what I did. You exposed fraud committed by family. Cole's laugh held no humor. In corporate America, that's not heroic. That's dangerous. She watched him pace the length of the windows, his controlled exterior cracking to reveal something rawer underneath. The setting sun caught the angles of his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw, the frustration in his dark eyes. Even angry, he was magnetic in a way that made her pulse quicken. David founded this company with me 12 years ago. Cole continued, his voice tight with conflict. We built it from nothing, two guys with big dreams and bigger debt. His family invested early when no one else would. Marcus getting that job was supposed to be a given. A given. Heat flashed through Naomi's chest. So this whole interview process was fake. 25 people wasted their time, so you could give the job to family. Cole stopped pacing and fixed her with a stare that made her breath catch. No. The interview process was real. I just never expected someone like you to walk in and change everything. The way he said, someone like you sent electricity down her spine. Not condescending, not dismissive, but loaded with something that made the air between them crackle. I need to understand exactly what Marcus has been doing, Cole said, moving closer to where she stood. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. Walk me through every discrepancy you found. For the next hour, they worked side by side, spreading documents across the conference table. Naomi showed him pattern after pattern of data manipulation, inflated client satisfaction scores, exaggerated market projections, completely fabricated competitive analysis reports. This isn't just padding numbers, she realized as the scope became clear. This is systematic deception designed to make potential investors think Nimbus is performing better than every competitor in the market. Cole's face grew darker with each revelation. The IPO, he muttered. What IPO? We're going public next quarter. These numbers will be part of our prospectus. He ran both hands through his hair, destroying his perfect appearance. Marcus wasn't just trying to get a job. He was trying to commit securities fraud on a massive scale. As they worked, Naomi became hyper-aware of their proximity. Every time he leaned over to examine a document, his shoulder brushed hers. When he pointed to specific numbers, his hand covered hers on the paper. The professional crisis was creating an intimacy that felt both appropriate and completely dangerous. Why? She asked quietly. Why would he risk everything for fake numbers? Cole's expression hardened. Because David's been pushing for Marcus to have a senior role for months. This position would put him in charge of all financial reporting. He could manipulate data indefinitely without oversight. Your business partner is in on this. I don't know. Cole's admission sounded like it physically hurt him. David's like a brother to me. But Marcus is his sister's kid, and family loyalty, it makes people do stupid things. The weight of what she'd uncovered settled over them both. This wasn't just about one dishonest candidate anymore. This was about betrayal at the highest levels, about choosing between friendship and integrity, about the kind of moral courage that could destroy relationships and careers. Cole's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. What is it? Naomi asked. David. He wants to see me in his office. Now. Cole looked at her with an expression that mixed protectiveness with something deeper. This conversation is about to get very complicated. Should I leave? No. His voice carried surprising firmness. You started this by telling the truth. You're going to see it through to the end. As they gathered the evidence, Naomi's hand accidentally brushed against Cole's. The contact was brief, but electric, sending heat shooting up her arm. When she looked up, his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that had nothing to do with financial fraud. Naomi, he said softly, her name sounding different in his voice. Before we walk into David's office and potentially blow up everything I've built, I need you to know something. Her heart hammered. What? In 12 years of business, I've never met anyone who impressed me as much as you did today. Your intelligence, your integrity, your courage. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that. The confession hung between them like a charged wire. Professional boundaries were dissolving in the face of mutual attraction and shared crisis. She could feel herself leaning toward him, drawn by something she'd never experienced before. The moment was shattered by Cole's phone ringing. David's name flashed on the screen. We need to talk. David's voice carried through the speaker, tight with barely controlled anger. Bring a new friend. Now. Cole ended the call and looked at Naomi with an expression that mixed desire with dread. Ready to meet the other half of the empire you just put in jeopardy? She straightened her thrift store blazer and lifted her chin. Ready. As they walked toward David's office, Cole caught her hand for just a moment. A brief squeeze that felt like both reassurance and promise. The gesture was professional, supportive, but his thumb traced across her knuckles in a way that made her stomach flutter. David Whitman's office occupied the corner of the 40th floor, all floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furniture that screamed old money. The man himself stood with his back to them, staring out at the Atlanta skyline like a king surveying his kingdom. When he turned around, Naomi saw the family resemblance immediately. David had Marcus's bone structure, but with 20 more years of corporate success etched into his features. His smile was polished and cold. Ms. Carter, he said, her name sounding like an accusation. The young woman who's caused such a stir. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in her shoes. When the powerful close ranks against you, how do you stand your ground? Cole tells me you've made some very serious allegations against my nephew, David continued, settling behind his massive desk like a judge taking the bench. I hope you understand the implications of what you're suggesting. I understand that fraud is fraud, Naomi replied, proud that her voice didn't shake. Regardless of who commits it, David's smile grew sharper. Such conviction, such simplicity. He opened a file on his desk. Tell me, MS. Carter, what makes you think a girl from Birmingham with a state school education is qualified to challenge the integrity of a Harvard Business School graduate? The condescension hit her like a physical blow, but instead of shrinking, she felt that familiar fire kindle in her chest. The numbers make me qualified. Truth doesn't require a pedigree. Cole stepped closer to her, a subtle show of support that didn't go unnoticed by David. Naomi's findings are accurate, Cole said firmly. The data manipulation is extensive and deliberate. Alleged data manipulation, David corrected smoothly. And even if there were some irregularities, surely we can handle this internally. Family matters, Cole. You understand. The room felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Naomi realized she wasn't just witnessing a business dispute. She was watching the potential destruction of a 12-year partnership, and she was the catalyst. But as David continued talking about handling things quietly and protecting everyone's interests, she made a decision that would either save Cole's company or destroy them both. She pulled out her phone and quietly started recording. At 11 p.m. in an empty skyscraper, she discovered that the most powerful man in Atlanta was just as afraid of being alone as she was. Have you ever found yourself working alongside someone and suddenly seeing them completely differently? When did you realize attraction was building? That's what happened to Naomi as she and Cole worked through the night, racing against time to save his company. The emergency board meeting was set for morning. David had spent 3 hours trying to convince them that Marcus's errors were minor miscalculations, but Cole refused to back down. The evidence was too damning, the potential legal exposure too severe. By midnight, they'd reached a stalemate that would either save or destroy Nimbus Corporation. Cole's office felt like a war room. Takeout containers from 3 different restaurants cluttered his desk, alongside financial reports, legal briefs, and empty coffee cups. The Atlanta skyline glittered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, but neither of them had time to appreciate the view. The board will want accountability, Cole said, loosening his tie completely. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms that made Naomi lose focus every time he reached for documents. David's going to argue this is a witch hunt targeting his family. Is it? Naomi asked, then immediately regretted the question. Cole looked up from the papers scattered across his desk. Even exhausted and stressed, his intensity made her pulse quicken. Do you think it is? No. Her answer came without hesitation. I think you're trying to protect your company's integrity, even when it costs you personally. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, gratitude, maybe relief. Most people would take David's side. He's charming, connected, been in Atlanta business circles since before I could afford a decent suit. I don't care about Atlanta business circles. Naomi kicked off her uncomfortable shoes, curling her legs under her in the leather chair. I care about right and wrong. It's not always that simple. Cole stood and moved to the windows, his reflection ghost-like against the city lights. David saved this company twice, once with his family's initial investment, once with his connections when we nearly lost our biggest client. I owe him everything. You don't owe him fraud. I know. His voice carried the weight of someone wrestling with impossible choices. But ending our partnership, it's like divorcing family. Naomi studied his profile against the window, the strong jaw, the tired slump of his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the windowsill like an anchor. Tell me about when you started the company. For the next hour, Cole shared stories she'd never read in business magazines. 2 young guys working 18-hour days in a rented garage, surviving on pizza and dreams. The early rejections, the near bankruptcies, the nights they wondered if they were delusional to think they could compete with established tech giants. David believed in the vision when no one else would, Cole said, returning to sit across from her. His family's money kept us afloat those first 2 years. Without him, you'd have found another way. Naomi's certainty surprised them both. People with your drive always do. How can you be so sure? You barely know me. I know you interviewed 25 candidates when you could have just given Marcus the job quietly. I know you're willing to risk a 12-year partnership rather than compromise your ethics. I know you stayed here all night, making sure we had every piece of evidence documented correctly. She leaned forward, close enough to see the exhaustion in his dark eyes. Those aren't the actions of someone who gives up easily. Cole stared at her with an expression that made her breath catch. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone grateful to be here. Someone who'd keep quiet to protect their opportunity. His voice dropped to that low timbre that made her skin tingle. Not someone who'd risk everything to protect people she's never met. The air between them crackled with tension that had nothing to do with corporate crisis. They were alone in a glass tower, the city sleeping below them, and the professional boundaries that had contained their attraction all day were dissolving in the exhausted intimacy of shared purpose. Naomi, Cole's voice carried warning and want in equal measure. She knew she should leave, should maintain the professional distance that would protect them both. Instead, she found herself moving closer, drawn by something she'd never felt before, the dangerous combination of intellectual respect and physical desire. The board meeting is in 6 hours, she said softly. 6 hours, he agreed, not moving away. We should get some rest. We should. Neither of them moved. The space between them hummed with possibility and peril. His eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, asking a question that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the electric connection that had been building since she'd walked into that boardroom. This is complicated, he whispered. Everything worth having is complicated. Cole reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand cupped her cheek with a gentleness that made her heart stutter. His thumb traced across her cheekbone, and she felt herself leaning into the touch like a flower turning towards sunlight. If we do this, he said, his forehead almost touching hers, everything changes. Everything's already changed. The truth of that statement hung between them. In 12 hours, she'd gone from desperate job candidate to potential whistleblower to whatever she was becoming in this moment. A woman falling for a man whose world was about to explode. Cole's phone buzzed with a text, breaking the spell. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. What is it? Naomi asked. David. He wants to meet tomorrow morning before the board session. Cole's jaw tightened. He's bringing lawyers. The reminder of tomorrow's battles crashed back over them both. The intimate bubble they'd created in his office burst, replaced by the harsh reality of corporate warfare and family betrayal. I should go, Naomi said, suddenly aware of how late it was, how alone they were, how dangerous this attraction felt. Stay. The word escaped Cole before he could stop it. I mean, it's late, and tomorrow's going to be brutal. There's a guest suite on the 38th floor. Company property, completely appropriate. His offer was practical, but the way he said it, like he couldn't bear the thought of her leaving, made her pulse race. Have you ever felt that moment when friendship becomes something more? When professional becomes personal? Share your thoughts below about crossing lines that can't be uncrossed. Okay, she whispered, the single word carrying more weight than it should. As Cole walked her to the elevator, their hands brushed in the hallway. The contact was brief but electric, a promise of complications neither was ready to face. Naomi, Cole's voice stopped her as the elevator doors began to close. Yes, tomorrow, when David brings his lawyers and the board starts asking questions. I want you to know that whatever happens, you did the right thing. The elevator doors closed on his words, but his meaning was clear. Tomorrow would test everything, their integrity, their courage, and the dangerous attraction that was growing stronger by the hour. As Naomi rode down 2 floors to the guest suite, she realized she was no longer just fighting for a job or justice. She was fighting for a man worth saving, even if saving him meant risking her heart. When the office elevator broke down at midnight, trapping them between floors, Naomi learned that Cole's controlled exterior hid panic attacks, and her gentle voice talking him through it would haunt his dreams for weeks. 40 stories above Atlanta, trapped in a metal box, she discovered that billionaires have panic attacks too, and that her voice was his anchor. When was the last time you let someone see your vulnerable side? How did it change your relationship? That's what Naomi faced when the impossible happened. Cole Matthews, the man who commanded boardrooms and built empires, was falling apart in front of her. The elevator had shuddered to a stop between floors 38 and 39 at 12:47 a.m. Emergency lighting cast everything in amber shadows, and the silence felt thick enough to touch. What started as a mechanical failure became something much more dangerous, a forced intimacy that would change everything between them. "The emergency phone's not working," Cole said, his voice tight with a control that was rapidly slipping. He'd been trying different buttons for 5 minutes, his movements becoming more frantic with each failed attempt. Naomi watched him carefully. The confident CEO who dominated that boardroom was gone, replaced by someone whose breathing was getting shorter and whose hands were starting to shake. "Cole," she kept her voice gentle. "Are you okay?" "Phoenix." The word came out clipped, unconvincing. "Just need to get out of here." But his breathing was getting faster, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He pressed himself against the elevator wall like he could somehow push through it, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow gasps. "Hey." Naomi moved closer, recognizing the signs from her mother's anxiety attacks. "Look at me." "Can't need to." Cole's words came in fragments between breaths that weren't bringing enough air. "Can't be trapped." Understanding hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just discomfort. This was full panic, the kind that could leave someone gasping and terrified in a confined space. The powerful man who'd faced down board members and business betrayals was being undone by 4 walls and a stuck elevator. "Cole." She reached for his hand, finding it cold and trembling. "I need you to listen to my voice, okay? Just focus on my voice." He tried to pull away, but she held on. "I can't. This is embarrassing." "Weak." Her words were soft but firm. "It's human. That's all this is. You're human." She guided him to sit on the elevator floor, something that would have horrified his corporate image, but was exactly what he needed. The expensive suit wrinkled against the metal floor, but she didn't care, and neither did he. "When I was 12, Naomi said, keeping her voice steady and calm, "my mama got stuck in a department store elevator for 4 hours. By the time they got her out, she was so panicked she couldn't speak for an hour afterward. You know what she told me later?" Cole's breathing was still rapid, but he was listening. She said the worst part wasn't being trapped. It was feeling like she had to be strong for everyone else, even when she was falling apart inside. Naomi squeezed his hand. "You don't have to be strong right now. Not with me." Something in her words seemed to reach him. His breathing was still shallow, but the wild panic in his eyes was starting to focus on her face. "Tell me about the first panic attack," she said softly. "I was 8. The words came out broken, like he was pulling them from somewhere deep. "House fire. Got trapped in my bedroom closet while the smoke filled up the room. Firefighters found me, but you never forgot what it felt like to be trapped," she finished gently. "Small spaces, no way out. It takes you right back there." Cole nodded, his breathing still uneven but slower now. "Elevators, closets, anywhere I can't control getting out. Usually I take the stairs, but tonight you were distracted." She understood completely. The crisis with David and Marcus, the late night working together, the growing tension between them. He'd forgotten his usual precautions. "This is pathetic," he muttered, embarrassment replacing panic. CEO of a Fortune 500 company afraid of elevators like someone who survived trauma as a child? Naomi interrupted firmly. "Like someone who built an empire despite having very human fears? There's nothing pathetic about that." They sat in the amber emergency lighting, her hand still holding his, and something shifted between them. The professional barriers, the power dynamics, the careful distance they'd maintained, all of it dissolved in the face of raw vulnerability. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Cole asked quietly. "You could have gotten this job, walked away from all the drama with David and Marcus. Instead, you're sitting on an elevator floor, holding the hand of your potential boss while he has a breakdown. Because you're not just my potential boss. The admission escaped before she could stop it. You're the first person who's ever seen my worth before I proved it. The first person who made me feel like I belonged in that boardroom. Cole's eyes searched her face in the dim light. Naomi, and because, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, I've never met anyone who made me want to take care of them the way you do. The confession hung between them like a live wire. Professional boundaries weren't just blurred now, they were obliterated. In the confined space, surrounded by crisis and vulnerability, they were just two people drawn to each other in ways that defied every rule about workplace relationships. I've been thinking about you, Cole admitted, his breathing finally normalizing. Since the moment you spoke up in that boardroom. Not just professionally, personally. The way you stood up for what was right even when it could hurt you. The way you're sitting here now, taking care of someone you barely know. I feel like I know you. Her thumb traced across his knuckles, a gesture that was both comforting and intimate. Maybe not your history or your habits, but I know who you are at your core. Someone who builds companies that matter, who protects people even when it costs you, who panics in elevators but still takes them when he's distracted by someone worth a risk. Cole laughed softly, the sound echoing strangely in their metal box. When you put it that way, I sound almost heroic. You are heroic, just not in the ways the business magazines write about. The emergency lighting flickered, reminding them they were still trapped, but somehow the confined space no longer felt threatening. It felt intimate, separate from the world and all its complications. Can I tell you something? Cole asked. Anything. I haven't let anyone see me like this in 20 years. Not panicked, not vulnerable, not real. Why me? Because you're real too. His free hand reached up to touch her face, fingers tracing her cheek with reverent gentleness. Everyone else in my world is performing. Playing roles, managing images, saying what they think I want to hear. But you told me the truth even when it was dangerous. You're telling me the truth now. The space between them was disappearing, drawn together by gravity neither could resist. His thumb traced across her lips, and she felt herself leaning into the touch, her heart racing for entirely different reasons now. This is dangerous, she whispered. Everything worth having is dangerous. Her own words from earlier echoed back at her, but now they carried different weight. She was falling for her potential boss in a stuck elevator, while his company was in crisis and her future hung in the balance. It was reckless and complicated and could destroy everything she'd worked for. And she didn't care. Cole. His name was half warning, half invitation. I know. His forehead touched hers, their breath mingling in the small space. I know all the reasons this is wrong. I know all the ways this could hurt us both. But right now, in this moment, I can't bring myself to care about any of that. The elevator gave a small shudder, and for a moment they both tensed. But then it settled again, leaving them suspended between floors, between professional and personal, between the safe choice and the one that could change everything. What happens when they get us out? Naomi asked. I don't know. His honesty was both terrifying and thrilling. I don't know how we go back to pretending there's nothing between us. I don't know how we handle the board meeting tomorrow, or David's lawyers, or any of it. Then let's not think about tomorrow. The words surprised her with their boldness. Let's just think about right now. Right now was Cole's hand in her hair, his eyes searching her face like she was the most important thing in his universe. Right now was the way he was looking at her. Not like a CEO evaluating an employee, but like a man falling for a woman who'd turned his world upside down. Right now, he murmured, I want to kiss you more than I've wanted anything in years. Then kiss me. When their lips met in the amber emergency lighting, 40 stories above Atlanta, it felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but when she responded by pulling him closer, it deepened into something that erased every rational thought about professional boundaries and workplace ethics. Share your thoughts below about crossing lines that can't be uncrossed. Have you ever been in a situation where the heart overruled the head? They broke apart when the elevator suddenly lurched back to life. emergency lighting giving way to normal illumination as the car began moving again. But the spell wasn't broken. If anything, returning to the real world made the connection between them feel more precious, more dangerous. Floor 38. The elevator announced cheerfully, as if it hadn't just been the setting for everything to change between them. As the doors opened, Cole caught her hand one more time. Naomi, yes. Whatever happens tomorrow, with the board, with David, with everything, I want you to know that these past few hours, they've been the most real I've felt in years. Thunder crashed outside, as if the weather was responding to the electricity between them. Cole stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper. I can't stop thinking about you. Before she could answer, his phone rang. Her mother's doctor with news that couldn't wait. But the look in his eyes promised this conversation wasn't over. The elevator doors closed between them, but everything had already changed. Tomorrow would bring corporate warfare, family betrayals, and impossible choices. But tonight, trapped between floors, they'd found something worth fighting for. Even if fighting for it meant risking everything else they'd worked to build. She woke up to her face on the front page of Atlanta Business Journal with a headline that made her stomach drop. Billionaire's mystery woman. From interview to intimate dinner in 48 hours. Have you ever been judged for who you're attracted to or who you're with? How did you handle the criticism? That's exactly what Naomi faced when her phone started buzzing at 6 a.m. with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The guest suite's floor-to-ceiling windows showed Atlanta waking up to sunshine and scandal. Coffee shops across the city displayed newspaper stands featuring her photo, grainy but unmistakable, taken through the restaurant window during what she'd thought was a private dinner. The headline wasn't even the worst part. Below the photo, the article speculated about everything from her background to her motives, painting her as either a gold digger or a corporate spy. Social media was worse. Comments ranged from supportive to vicious, with strangers debating her worth based on her appearance, her clothes, her obvious lack of wealth. Her phone rang again. This time, it was her mother calling from Birmingham. Baby girl, what's happening up there? Mrs. Johnson just called saying you're in the newspaper with some rich man, and people on Facebook are saying all kinds of terrible things about you. Naomi's heart sank. She'd hoped to keep her mother out of this until she knew how everything would play out. Mama, it's complicated. I can't really explain right now, but are you in trouble? Do you need me to come up there? The protective concern in her mother's voice almost broke her. No, Mama, I am okay. I promise I'll explain everything when I can. After hanging up, Naomi stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her looked the same as yesterday, but everything else had changed. 24 hours ago, she was an anonymous job candidate. Now she was Atlanta's most talked-about mystery woman. A knock at the suite door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw Cole looking like he hadn't slept at all. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, shirt wrinkled, tie missing, dark circles under his eyes that made him look both vulnerable and dangerously attractive. Have you seen the news? He asked the moment she opened the door. Hard to miss. She gestured to the newspapers scattered across the coffee table. Someone was watching us pretty closely. Cole moved into the room with restless energy, like a caged animal looking for escape. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Board members, investors, reporters. Everyone wants to know who you are and what you mean to the company. What did you tell them? The truth. His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. That you're the most qualified candidate I've interviewed in years, and what happened between us personally is nobody's business but ours. The way he said, what happened between us, sent heat through her chest. Last night, in the elevator felt like a dream now. Too intimate, too perfect to be real. But the way he was looking at her proved it had been very real indeed. The board meeting's been moved to this afternoon, Cole continued. David's bringing his lawyers, and now they'll want to discuss whether our connection compromises the investigation into Marcus. Does it? The question came out softer than she intended. Cole stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the exhaustion and worry in his dark eyes. Not the investigation, but it definitely compromises my ability to think clearly about anything else. The confession hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to face. In the bright morning light, with newspapers screaming about scandal and phones buzzing with crisis, the magic of their elevator moment felt both more precious and more impossible. "Cole!" She started to say something rational, something about professional boundaries and appropriate behavior, but he cut her off. "I know what you're going to say. I know all the reasons this is complicated, but I can't pretend last night didn't happen, and I can't pretend I don't care about you." Before she could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed David Whitman's name, and Cole's expression darkened. "I have to take this," he said apologetically, then answered with professional coolness. "David." Even from across the room, Naomi could hear David's agitated voice through the phone. Cole's responses were mostly single words. Yes, no, understood. But his face grew more tense with each exchange. "Fine," Cole said finally. "But I'm bringing Naomi. She's the one who uncovered the fraud, and she deserves to be part of any discussion about it." He hung up and turned to her with an expression that mixed protectiveness with something darker. "David wants to meet privately before the board session. Just the three of us." "What does he want?" "To make this all go away quietly." Cole's voice carried disgust. "He's suggesting we handle the Marcus situation internally, keep it out of the public eye, and let everyone move on with their lives. Including letting Marcus keep his job?" That wasn't explicitly stated, but Cole shrugged, the gesture conveying his opinion of David's proposal. Naomi felt that familiar fire kindle in her chest. "And what did you tell him?" "That we'd hear what he has to say." "But Naomi..." Cole moved closer, his voice dropping to that low timbre that made her skin tingle. "I want you to know that whatever David offers, whatever pressure he applies, I'm not backing down. The fraud investigation continues, and you're getting the job you earned." The protective intensity in his voice made her heart race for all the wrong reasons. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about him defending her, protecting her, choosing her over a 12-year partnership. "What if the board disagrees?" she asked. "What if they decide I'm too much of a liability? Then I remind them that I own 51% of this company." Cole replied with quiet steel. "And my decisions are final." The power in his voice, the absolute certainty that he would fight for her, sent electricity through her entire body. She was falling for this man in ways that defied every rational thought about workplace relationships and professional boundaries. A sharp knock interrupted the moment. Cole opened the door to reveal a woman in an expensive suit holding a tablet. "Mr. Matthews, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem. Channel 5 News is downstairs asking for interviews about the fraud investigation. Someone leaked information about Marcus Whitman and the SEC filing discrepancies." Cole's face went pale. "How much do they know?" "Everything," the woman replied grimly. "They're calling it the biggest corporate scandal in Atlanta this year. Share your experience of being judged or misunderstood in a relationship. How did you handle public scrutiny?" As they prepared to face David's private meeting, Naomi realized their problems were multiplying faster than they could contain them. The media attention, the corporate politics, the growing attraction between them. Everything was converging into a perfect storm that could destroy Cole's company, her reputation, and any chance they had of building something real together. But as Cole took her hand while they walked toward the elevator, his touch steady and reassuring, she realized something that should have terrified her. She was ready to fight for this, for him, for whatever they were becoming, even if it meant going to war with the most powerful family in Atlanta business. The knock at her door wasn't another reporter. It was David Whitman, with an offer that made her blood run cold. "Walk away now, keep quiet about Marcus, and I'll pay off your mother's medical bills. Stay, and I'll make sure you never work in tech again." He offered her everything she'd ever needed with one hand, while holding a knife to her future with the other, and both men she was starting to care about hung in the balance. What would you do if someone tried to buy your silence? Would you take the money or fight for what's right? That's the impossible choice David Whitman laid at Naomi's feet in the quiet corner of an upscale coffee shop, with a morning crowd provided perfect cover for corporate blackmail. David looked like money, from his Italian leather shoes to his platinum watch. Everything about him screamed old Atlanta wealth. But his smile was cold as winter, and his eyes held the calculating gleam of someone used to getting his way through fear and financial pressure. "Miss Carter," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the small table between them. "I believe you'll find this interesting." Inside the envelope were photocopied medical bills, her mother's cancer treatment, the experimental therapy, the ongoing medications that cost more than Naomi made in 6 months. Every date, every amount, every desperate payment plan she negotiated with hospitals across Birmingham. "How did you get these?" Her voice stayed steady despite the ice forming in her stomach. "I make it my business to understand people who threaten my family's interests." David's tone was conversational, like they were discussing the weather instead of her most private struggles. "Your mother's medical expenses total just over $340,000. Quite a burden for someone in your financial situation." Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she looked through the papers. Seeing her desperation laid out in black and white, the rejected insurance claims, the payment deferrals, the growing debt that kept her awake at night, felt like being stripped naked in public. "I'm prepared to take care of all of it," David continued smoothly. "Every bill paid in full, plus enough extra to ensure your mother receives the best care available. All you have to do is admit that you made an honest mistake about Marcus's numbers." "It wasn't a mistake." "Of course it was." His smile never wavered. "You're a bright young woman from a state school, trying to impress a room full of Ivy League graduates. Under that kind of pressure, anyone might misinterpret financial projections. Perfectly understandable." The condescension in his voice made her jaw clench. "Those numbers were deliberately falsified. According to you." David leaned back in his chair, projecting the casual confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "But you're not a certified financial analyst, are you? You don't have an MBA from Wharton like Marcus does. Who do you think the board will believe?" The threat was clear, even wrapped in polite language. They would destroy her credibility, paint her as an unqualified outsider who'd misunderstood complex financial data. Her word against a Harvard MBA from a connected family. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. David's smile turned shark-like. "Then you'll discover just how small the tech industry really is. A few phone calls to the right people, and you'll find that no one wants to hire someone who makes false accusations against respected colleagues. Your reputation will be complicated." The coffee shop buzzed with normal morning activity around them. People grabbing coffee before work, students studying, life proceeding normally while her entire future hung in the balance. She thought about her mother, growing weaker despite the treatments, depending on medications they could barely afford. $340,000 would solve everything. Her mother could get the best care, stop worrying about money, focus on healing. All Naomi had to do was lie about what she'd seen, let Marcus keep his job, and walk away from the most important opportunity of her career. "You have until noon to decide," David said, checking his expensive watch. "The board meeting is at 2. Either you recant your accusations publicly, or you face the consequences of making enemies you can't afford to have." He stood to leave, then paused as if remembering something casual. "Oh, and Ms. Carter, whatever schoolgirl fantasy you've developed about Cole, that needs to end too. A man in his position can't afford to be associated with someone whose judgment is questionable. I'm sure you understand." After David left, Naomi sat alone with her mother's medical bills spread across the coffee shop table. Her phone buzzed with a text from Cole. "Where are you?" "David's meeting got moved up. We need to talk." But how could she tell him about the offer? How could she explain that David was willing to pay hundreds of thousands to make her disappear? Cole would want to fight, would risk his company and his partnership to protect her. And what right did she have to let him do that? Her phone rang. Her mother's number. "Hey, baby girl. I just wanted to hear your voice. Are you okay up there?" The concern in her mother's voice almost broke her resolve. Here was a woman who'd sacrificed everything for her daughter's education, who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for Naomi's college, who was now facing a medical battle she couldn't afford to lose. "I'm Fina. Mama. How are you feeling today?" "Oh, you know me. Tough as nails. But honey, I saw some of those news stories online. People are saying mean things about you. Are you sure you're okay?" Naomi closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every impossible choice pressing down on her chest. Mama, if I could solve all your medical money problems, but it meant giving up my dreams, would you want me to do it? The silence stretched long enough that Naomi wondered if the call had dropped. Baby girl, her mother said finally, I didn't raise you to sacrifice your integrity for anything. Not even for me. Whatever's happening up there, you do what's right. We'll figure out the rest together. Those words hit Naomi like lightning. Here was her mother, facing financial ruin and a life-threatening illness, still telling her daughter to choose honor over easy money. It was the kind of moral courage that had shaped Naomi's entire life. When Cole found her 20 minutes later, she was still sitting in the coffee shop with tears streaming down her face and David's envelope torn into pieces. What happened? Cole demanded, sliding into the chair David had vacated. His protective intensity was immediate and overwhelming. He offered to pay my mother's medical bills if I'd recant my testimony about Marcus. The words came out steady despite her emotional turmoil. Cole's face went through several expressions: surprise, fury, and something darker that made her pulse quicken despite everything else happening. How much? His voice was deadly quiet. Over 300,000. And you said no. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. I said no. Cole reached across the table and took her hands, his touch warm and steady. That couldn't have been easy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. She met his eyes, seeing admiration and something deeper reflected back at her. He also said our connection was a liability you couldn't afford. Let me worry about what I can and can't afford. Cole's thumb traced across her knuckles, the gesture both comforting and intimate. Right now, I'm more concerned about the woman who just turned down financial security to protect people she's never met. The way he was looking at her made her breath catch, like she was brave instead of terrified, strong instead of desperate, worth protecting instead of disposing of. David's going to make good on his threats, she warned. Then we'll deal with those too. Cole's certainty was absolute. But Naomi, I need you to know something before this gets worse. What? Last night in that elevator, that wasn't just crisis bonding or adrenaline. What I feel for you is real, and it's not going anywhere regardless of what David or the board or anyone else thinks. Tell me in the comments what you would have done with that offer. When everything is on the line, how do you choose between security and integrity? His confession should have thrilled her, but instead it terrified her. Because now she wasn't just risking her own future, she was risking his too. And David Whitman was about to make sure they both paid the price for choosing each other over easy solutions. That night, as Cole held her while she made the hardest decision of her life, to testify against Marcus despite David's threats, neither of them knew that Marcus had one final card to play, a recording that would either save his career or destroy them both. The audio file lasted 3 minutes and 47 seconds, long enough to either clear Marcus's name or reveal that everyone had been played from the beginning. Have you ever had someone try to destroy your reputation with lies? How did you fight back? That's exactly what Naomi and Cole faced when Marcus Whitman released an audio recording that made their fight for truth look like a conspiracy for personal gain. The boardroom was packed tighter than Sunday church service. 12 board members, 3 lawyers, 2 reporters, and enough tension to power half of Atlanta filled the space where this all began. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, news vans lined the street like vultures waiting for fresh scandal. Cole sat at the head of the table, his composure perfect despite everything crashing down around them. Naomi sat 3 chairs to his right, feeling every eye in the room judging her presence, her clothes, her right to be there. David Whitman lounged at the opposite end like a king holding court, confident in whatever card he was about to play. Before we begin, David announced, I think the board should hear some relevant audio that came to my attention this morning. He pressed play on a digital recorder, and Naomi's own voice filled the room. The quarterly projections in Portfolio 25 don't match the public filings. Someone's been playing with numbers that could mislead investors by millions. Then Cole's voice, show me the discrepancies. I want every detail documented. Her voice again. If we can prove systematic manipulation, It would destroy Marcus's credibility completely. The job would have to go to someone else. Cole's response, someone like you? Someone like me? The recording stopped, leaving the boardroom in stunned silence. But Naomi's blood was running cold because she remembered that conversation, and it hadn't happened the way the recording suggested. As you can clearly hear, David said with satisfaction, Ms. Carter and my business partner conspired to frame my nephew with false accusations. The so-called fraud investigation was actually a calculated attack designed to eliminate Marcus from consideration and ensure Ms. Carter received the position. Board members exchanged shocked glances. Lawyers scribbled notes. The reporters looked like Christmas had come early. That's not what happened, Naomi said, finding her voice despite the horror of hearing her words twisted into weapons. That conversation is edited. Those statements were made at different times about different topics. Convenient claim, David replied smoothly. But audio evidence doesn't lie. Audio can be manipulated, Cole said, his voice carrying deadly calm. And anyone with basic editing software could splice together fragments to create false conversations. Are you suggesting I fabricated evidence? David's shock seemed genuine, but Naomi caught the slight smirk he couldn't quite hide. The head of the board, Margaret Shun, leaned forward with the expression of someone trying to navigate a minefield. These are serious allegations on both sides. Ms. Carter, can you provide any evidence that this recording has been altered? Naomi's mind raced. She remembered the actual conversations, talking about Marcus's numbers during their first meeting, discussing investigation procedures during their late-night work session, making an offhand comment about qualified candidates during a completely different discussion. But proving manipulation would require technical analysis they didn't have time for. I can, said a voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see a young black woman in jeans and a Georgia Tech sweatshirt standing in the doorway. She looked nervous but determined, clutching a laptop bag like a shield. Who are you? Margaret Chin asked. Keisha Washington. I'm a graduate student in digital forensics at Tech, and I'm also Naomi's cousin. She looked directly at David. I heard about the investigation on the news, so I've been monitoring social media and news sites for any digital evidence that might surface. When this audio file got leaked to reporters this morning, I downloaded it for analysis. David's confident expression flickered for just a moment. This is highly irregular. The board can't accept testimony from someone with obvious bias. Audio forensics isn't biased, Keisha interrupted, pulling out her laptop. Digital manipulation leaves fingerprints, compression artifacts, frequency inconsistencies, unnatural pauses. This file has all of them. She connected her laptop to the boardroom's display system, bringing up audio analysis software that looked like something from a sci-fi movie. Waveforms, frequency graphs, and technical data filled the massive screen. See these gaps? Keisha pointed to barely visible breaks in the audio pattern. Those indicate where segments were cut and spliced together. And this frequency distortion here? That's from pieces recorded in different acoustic environments being artificially matched. The room watched in fascination as she broke down the technical evidence. Naomi felt hope blooming in her chest, but she didn't dare celebrate yet. Furthermore, Keisha continued, the metadata shows this file was created yesterday at 11:47 p.m. and edited multiple times between midnight and 3 a.m. Whoever made this recording worked all night putting it together. All eyes turned to Marcus, who had gone pale as his cousin's technical expertise destroyed his final gambit. David's expression had shifted from confidence to barely controlled panic. This is all very interesting, David said, trying to regain control, but digital analysis can be manipulated just as easily as audio files. We're supposed to believe a graduate student over established professionals. You're right, Cole said, standing slowly. His voice carried the quiet authority that had built an empire. Digital analysis can be questioned, but there's something that can't be disputed. He walked to his briefcase and pulled out a small device that made David's face go white. I've been recording all my business conversations since the company went public, Cole announced. Legal protection against exactly this kind of situation. Every meeting, every phone call, every discussion about company business. He connected the device to the display system. This is the actual conversation Ms. Carter and I had about the investigation. Recorded in real time, unedited, with complete metadata verification. The real conversation played out for the room. Naomi's discovery of the fraud, Cole's immediate concern for legal compliance, their methodical approach to documenting evidence. No conspiracy, no personal agenda, just two people try to protect the company from criminal activity. When it finished, the silence was deafening. The question now, Cole said, his gaze moving around the room, is whether this board wants to focus on actual fraud committed against our investors or manufactured scandals designed to protect the guilty. Margaretchen looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Mr. Whitman, do you have any response to this evidence? David sat frozen, his carefully constructed attack crumbling around him. Marcus had already pushed back from the table, looking like he might bolt for the door. But David had one more desperate play. Share your comeback stories below. When false accusations threatened to destroy you, how did you fight back and reclaim your truth? You want to talk about fraud? David said, his voice rising with desperation. Let's discuss Cole's offshore accounts that funded this entire witch hunt. Let's talk about the money that's been flowing through shell companies to manipulate our stock price and eliminate anyone who threatens his absolute control. The accusation hit the room like a bomb. Board members gasped, lawyers grabbed phones, and reporters started typing frantically. But Cole just smiled, the kind of calm, confident expression that came from having nothing to hide. By all means, he said quietly, let's talk about my finances. I think you'll find that conversation very illuminating indeed. As Naomi watched Cole prepare to defend himself against David's desperate lies, she realized they'd moved beyond corporate fraud into full warfare. And the man she was falling for was about to prove just how dangerous he could be when someone threatened the people he cared about. She thought she knew the man she was falling for, until his business partner revealed financial secrets that made her question everything she'd risked to defend him. When someone you trust is accused of something serious, what's your first instinct? Do you doubt or defend? That's the moment of truth Naomi faced as David Whitman's accusations hung in the boardroom air like poison gas, threatening to destroy everything she believed about Cole Matthews. Offshore accounts? Cole's laugh held genuine amusement, which somehow made it more unsettling. David, I think your desperation is showing. But Naomi found herself studying Cole's face, looking for cracks in his composure, signs that David might be telling the truth. The man she'd kissed in an elevator, the man she was falling for, was he capable of the same deception he was accusing Marcus of? David sensed her doubt and pounced on it like a predator. Ms. Carter, you seem surprised. Didn't your thorough research uncover the Swiss accounts? The shell companies in the Cayman Islands? The systematic money laundering that's been funding Cole's corporate empire? That's enough, Margaretchen interrupted. Mr. Whitman, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support them? David smiled like a shark scenting blood. I have documentation going back 3 years. Bank transfers, corporate filings, communication records. Everything needed to prove that Cole Matthews has been using Nimbus Corporation as a front for illegal financial activity. He slid a thick folder across the table to Margaret. Page 12 shows a transfer of $2.3 million to a Swiss account registered under a false identity. Page 18 documents payments to shell companies that don't actually exist. Page 26. As David rattled off details, Naomi watched Cole's expression carefully. She expected denial, anger, defensive explanations. Instead, she saw something that chilled her blood. Cole looked almost bored, like David was reading him a shopping list instead of accusing him of federal crimes. Are you finished? Cole asked when David finally stopped talking. Those documents speak for themselves. Do they? Cole turned to Margaret. Before we waste more time on David's fairy tales, perhaps we should establish some context. Margaret, how long have you known me? 12 years, Margaret replied carefully. Since you and David founded the company. And in those 12 years, how many times have I submitted to independent financial audits? Every quarter, as required by. Margaret stopped, understanding dawning in her expression. Every quarter for 12 years. plus additional audits when we went public, when we acquired smaller companies, and during every major investment round. Cole nodded. 48 independent audits by 4 different firms, plus SEC oversight, plus yearly reviews by the board's financial committee. But somehow David discovered illegal activity that 50 professional auditors missed. The logic was devastating, but David wasn't finished. Auditors can be bought, especially when millions of dollars are at stake. Interesting theory. Cole opened his own briefcase and pulled out what looked like a legal document. David, would you mind reading the date on this power of attorney form? David's confidence flickered as he glanced at the paper. What does this have to do with? The date, David. March 15th, 2 years ago. And what does that document authorize? David's face was losing color rapidly. It authorizes third-party access to financial records for audit purposes. Specifically, it authorizes Margaret Shun and 2 other board members to conduct surprise audits of all my personal and business accounts at any time, without notice, using independent forensic accountants. Cole's smile was sharp as a blade, a power they've exercised 6 times in the past 2 years. Margaret nodded slowly. We have complete access to every account, every transaction, every financial record. There are no secret Swiss accounts, Mr. Whitman. No shell companies, no money laundering. Just transparent business practices and legally compliant financial management. The boardroom had gone completely silent. David's elaborate accusation was crumbling under the weight of basic facts, but Naomi could see him preparing one last desperate attack. Then explain this, David said, pulling out his phone and showing the screen to the room. A $340,000 transfer made yesterday to Birmingham Medical Center. Payment in full for all outstanding bills under the name Joyce Carter. Naomi's heart stopped. Her mother's medical bills, the exact amount David had offered to pay if she'd recanted her testimony. You paid them, she whispered, staring at Cole in shock. You pay my mother's medical bills. The admission hit the room like a thunderclap. Board members exchanged glances. Lawyers started writing frantically. David's smile returned full force. So much for ethical business practices, David said triumphantly. Cole Matthews just admitted to bribing a witness with hundreds of thousands of dollars. But Cole was looking directly at Naomi, his expression completely unguarded for the first time since she'd met him. I paid them because your mother deserves the best medical care available, and financial stress shouldn't complicate her treatment. The payment was made before David's blackmail attempt, with no conditions attached. That's convenient timing, David sneered. Is it? Cole pulled out another document. This is a standing authorization I established 3 months ago, long before I met Naomi. My company pays outstanding medical bills for any employee or potential employee facing health crises. It's part of our benefits package. Margaret looked confused. I don't remember approving such a program. Because it's funded from my personal accounts, not company money. And it's not limited to employees. I've been quietly paying medical bills for families across Atlanta for 2 years. Cole's voice softened as he looked at Naomi. Your mother's treatment was covered the day you walked into that interview room, regardless of whether you got the job. Naomi felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. You've been helping people you don't even know. Anonymous donations through medical billing companies. Families who can't afford cancer treatment. Children needing surgery. Elderly people choosing between medication and rent. Cole shrugged like he was discussing the weather. I make more money than any person needs. Why wouldn't I use it to help people who are suffering? The revelation hit Naomi like lightning. She'd been falling for a man who secretly paid strangers' medical bills, who'd helped her mother before they'd even kissed, who'd been quietly changing lives without seeking credit or recognition. David made a sound of disgust. How touching. But the timing is still suspicious. The timing is documented, Cole interrupted. Every payment, every authorization, every decision is recorded and audited. Unlike your nephew's fraudulent reports and your desperate attempt to frame an innocent woman. Margaretchen looked like she'd had enough drama for one lifetime. Based on the evidence presented today, I recommend we proceed with the original fraud investigation. Mr. Marcus Whitman will be terminated immediately and referred to appropriate authorities. Mr. David Whitman. She paused, studying David's defeated expression. Your resignation will be accepted, effective immediately. David's face cycled through shock, rage, and finally desperate calculation. You're making a mistake. Without my family's connections, without my business relationships, this company won't survive. We'll take our chances, Cole said quietly. As security escorted David from the building, he turned back with a look of pure venom. This isn't over, Cole. You've chosen some nobody over family, and that choice will cost you everything. When the boardroom finally cleared, Naomi found herself alone with Cole and a truth that changed everything between them. How do you handle relationship tests when the stakes are life-changing? Share your thoughts about trust during crisis. You knew, she said quietly. You knew David was going to threaten me with my mother's bills, so you made sure they were already paid. Cole moved closer, his eyes intense and vulnerable. I knew David well enough to predict his tactics. But Naomi, I didn't pay those bills to protect you from blackmail. I paid them because no one should have to choose between their integrity and their mother's life. As they worked through the night to prepare Cole's complete financial defense for the board's review, Naomi discovered something that made her heart stop. A series of anonymous donations to Birmingham medical centers, specifically covering treatments for patients who couldn't afford care. The dates matched her mother's cancer treatment timeline exactly. The man she was falling for hadn't just defended her against corporate warfare. He'd been protecting her family before he'd ever fallen in love with her. The medical bills that had kept her awake for 3 years, the treatments that saved her mother's life, they'd all been paid by the man she was falling in love with months before they ever met. Have you ever discovered that someone helped you without you knowing? How did it change how you felt about them? That's the overwhelming realization that hit Naomi as she sat in Cole's private study, surrounded by thank you letters from hundreds of families whose lives he'd quietly saved. Cole's penthouse study looked like a shrine to anonymous generosity. File cabinets filled with medical records he'd never read, thank you cards from people he'd never met, bank statements showing systematic donations that totaled millions of dollars. On his desk sat a simple wooden box filled with handwritten notes, the only recognition he'd ever sought for changing so many lives. How long have you been doing this? Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Since the company went public. Cole leaned against the window, Atlanta's lights sprawling below them like fallen stars. The first year we made serious money, I realized I had more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. So I started looking for ways to make it useful. She held up a letter from a single father whose daughter's leukemia treatment had been mysteriously paid in full. These people don't know who you are. That's the point. Charity with strings attached isn't charity. It's investment in gratitude. Cole's expression was soft, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. I wanted to help people without changing their relationship to their own dignity. Naomi understood completely. She'd lived her entire life refusing handouts, working multiple jobs to avoid depending on anyone else's pity. If she'd known Cole was paying her mother's bills out of romantic interest, it would have felt like manipulation. But knowing he'd been helping strangers for years, including her family before he'd even met her, that changed everything. My mother's bills, she said quietly. When exactly were they paid? Cole pulled out a file folder and handed it to her. 3 months ago, 2 weeks after I saw your application in the initial screening process. Her hand shook as she opened the folder. There was Joyce Carter's complete medical file, treatment schedules, payment authorizations, all dated months before Naomi had ever walked into that boardroom. You saw my application and decided to help my mother? The concept was so foreign to her experience that she could barely process it. I saw your application and recognized something. Cole moved closer, his voice carrying that low intensity that made her pulse race. Your essay about using technology to solve systemic healthcare problems. The way you wrote about watching your mother choose between medication and groceries. The determination to change a system that forces impossible choices. She looked up from the paperwork, tears blurring her vision. You helped her because of something I wrote? I helped her because she raised someone remarkable and she deserves support regardless of whether you ever got this job. Cole sat on the edge of his desk, close enough to reach out and touch her face. When you walked into that interview room, I already knew your character. The way you handled Marcus just confirmed what I'd suspected from your application. The revelation hit her like waves crashing over rocks. Every assumption she'd made about their relationship, every worry about professional boundaries and workplace ethics, every fear that his interest was connected to the job, all of it dissolved in the face of this simple truth. He'd fallen for her words before he'd ever seen her face. The night in the elevator, she whispered, "When you said I wasn't what you expected, I expected someone impressive based on her application. I didn't expect someone who would turn my entire world upside down by walking into a room." His thumb traced across her cheek, catching tears she didn't realize were falling. "I didn't expect to feel like I'd been waiting my whole life for someone I'd never met." The confession hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond corporate scandals and board meetings. This wasn't just attraction born from crisis. This was connection that had started with words on paper and grown into something that could reshape both their lives. "Show me the others," she said softly. For the next 2 hours, Cole walked her through his secret life as Atlanta's most anonymous philanthropist. The single mother whose son's surgery was covered after she wrote a heartbreaking post on social media. The elderly man whose wife's Alzheimer's care was mysteriously funded after he mentioned their struggles to a grocery store cashier. The teenage girl whose college dreams were saved when someone paid off her family's crushing medical debt. "Oh, where do you find them?" Naomi asked, amazed by the scope of his quiet generosity. "Medical billing companies, hospital social workers, community organizations. When you're looking for people who need help, they're not hard to find." Cole pulled out another box of letters. "The hard part is making sure the help doesn't come with judgment or conditions." She read letter after letter from people whose lives had been changed by anonymous kindness. Families who could focus on healing instead of bankruptcy. Parents who could comfort dying children instead of negotiating payment plans. People who had been given the gift of dignity along with financial rescue. This is why David's blackmail didn't work, she realized. You'd already experienced what it felt like to help my family. His offer was just insulting. David never understood that money without respect is just another form of control. Cole's voice carried quiet conviction. "When I pay someone's medical bills, it's because I believe they deserve health and dignity, not because I want them to owe me something." Naomi stood and moved to the window, Atlanta spreading below them like a circuit board of lights and dreams. Somewhere in that sprawling city, her mother was sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, not knowing that her daughter's potential boss had become her anonymous guardian angel months ago. "I need to ask you something," she said without turning around. "When you offered me the job, was it because of my qualifications or because you'd already decided to help my family?" The silence stretched long enough that she turned to see Cole watching her with an expression of complete vulnerability. "The job was always yours based on merit," he said quietly. "Your application was the strongest I'd seen in 5 years. Your interview performance destroyed 24 Ivy League competitors. Your integrity under pressure proved everything I'd hoped about your character." He stood and moved closer. "But would I have noticed your application among hundreds if your essay hadn't made me want to help your mother? Probably not." It was the most honest answer he could have given, and somehow that made it perfect. No false assurances about blind meritocracy. No claims that personal connection hadn't influenced professional decisions. Just truth, complicated and real and human. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now you decide whether you can work with someone whose personal feelings might complicate professional objectivity." Cole's smile was rueful. "And I decide whether I can manage a company while being completely distracted by someone who makes me want to be a better man." The confession sent heat through her entire body. Standing in his study, surrounded by evidence of his secret generosity, she realized she wasn't just falling for Cole Matthews, the CEO. She was falling for Cole Matthews, the man who paid strangers' medical bills and kept their thank you letters in a wooden box like treasures. "There's something else I need to tell you," she said, moving closer until they were almost touching. "Something that's going to complicate everything even more." What? I'm falling in love with you. The words escaped before she could stop them, hanging in the air between professional and personal, between safe and dangerous. Not because you helped my mother, not because you gave me a job, but because you're the kind of man who does those things and expects nothing in return. Cole's response was immediate and overwhelming. His hands framed her face as he kissed her with an intensity that erased every rational thought about workplace relationships and appropriate boundaries. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "I've been falling for you since I read your application," he whispered. "But I've been in love with you since you chose integrity over easy money in that coffee shop." Share your gratitude stories below. When someone helped you without expecting anything in return, how did it change your life? Their emotional breakthrough was interrupted by Cole's phone buzzing with an emergency alert. Marcus had just leaked the company's client list to competitors, and 3 major contracts worth $50 million were about to walk away. The war was far from over. But as they prepared to face the next crisis together, Naomi realized something that should have terrified her. She was ready to fight for this man, this company, this love that had grown from anonymous kindness into something that could change both their lives forever. Because sometimes the best love stories start with someone seeing your worth before you even know they're watching. While they were falling in love, Marcus was burning down the empire. And the flames were spreading faster than they could contain them. When someone tries to destroy what you've built, how do you fight back? Have you ever had to prove yourself in a crisis? That's exactly what Naomi and Cole faced when Marcus Whitman decided that if he couldn't have the job, nobody would have the company. The emergency conference room buzzed with panic at 6 a.m. 3 major clients had received overnight emails containing Nimbus Corporation's complete client database, pricing strategies, and proprietary development plans. Marcus hadn't just leaked information. He'd weaponized it, giving competitors everything they needed to steal millions in business. Phoenix Financial is pulling their $18 million contract, Cole's assistant announced, her voice tight with stress. They said they can't work with a company that can't protect confidential information. Sterling Tech just canceled their renewal, another voice added. That's another $12 million gone. Cole stood at the head of the table, his usual composure cracked but not broken. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. Even in crisis, he was magnetic, a general rallying troops for a war they might not win. "How many clients received the leaked information?" he asked. "All of them," his head of security replied grimly. Marcus had access to the master database through his interview materials. He sent everything to our 20 biggest competitors, plus business journalists at 5 major publications. Naomi felt sick. This was her fault. If she hadn't exposed Marcus's fraud, if she'd stayed quiet like David wanted, none of this would be happening. 50 people's jobs were at risk because she'd chosen integrity over peace. "Stop," Cole said, and she realized she'd spoken her thoughts aloud. "This is not your fault. This is what happens when criminals get desperate. But if you hadn't spoken up, Marcus would have continued manipulating financial data until the fraud destroyed us completely." Cole's voice carried absolute certainty. "This is damage we can survive. Securities fraud would have killed the company permanently." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of that statement. They were fighting for survival, but at least they were fighting clean. Options, Cole demanded. For the next 2 hours, they developed battle plans. Legal action against Marcus for corporate sabotage. Damage control calls to every affected client. Emergency meetings with competitors who'd received stolen information. A coordinated media response that would frame the leaks as criminal activity rather than corporate incompetence. "I'll handle Phoenix Financial," Naomi said during a brief lull in the chaos. "Their concerns are about data security protocols. I wrote my master's thesis on cybersecurity in financial services." Cole looked surprised. "You want to present to our biggest client on your first day?" "I want to save a job I earned." Her voice carried steel that surprised them both. "And I want to prove that hiring me was worth the cost." The Phoenix Financial presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m., 4 hours to prepare a defense that could save or destroy Cole's company. As the conference room emptied, Naomi found herself alone with Cole and the weight of impossible expectations. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, moving closer. "Phoenix's CEO is notorious for destroying people who waste his time." "I'm sure." She met his eyes, seeing admiration and worry in equal measure. "But I need to know you trust me to handle this." "I trust you." His response was immediate and absolute. "I've trusted you since the moment you chose truth over safety." The way he said it sent electricity through her chest. They were standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the exhaustion and determination in his dark eyes. The crisis was creating an intimacy that felt both appropriate and completely dangerous. "Naomi," his voice dropped to that low timbre that made her pulse race. "We can't," she whispered, even as she found herself leaning toward him. "Not now. Not with everything falling apart." When? The single word carried so much want that it made her breath catch. When do we stop pretending this is just professional? When do we admit that what's happening between us matters more than corporate policies? Before she could answer, his phone rang with another crisis. But the look in his eyes promised this conversation wasn't over. The Phoenix financial meeting took place in their downtown headquarters, a glass tower that rivaled Nimbus Corporation for expensive intimidation. James Phoenix himself attended. 60 years old, silver-haired, with a reputation for verbal evisceration that had ended careers. "Ms. Carter," Phoenix said as she entered the conference room, "I understand you're responsible for the security breach that compromised my company's confidential information." "No, sir," Naomi replied calmly, setting up her laptop. "I'm responsible for discovering the fraud that led to desperate criminal behavior." "There's a difference." Phoenix's eyebrows rose slightly. Around the table, his team exchanged glances. Nobody talked back to James Phoenix with quite that level of confidence. "Explain." For the next 45 minutes, Naomi presented a comprehensive analysis of corporate data security, the difference between internal fraud and external threats, and a detailed plan for preventing future breaches. She spoke with authority born from genuine expertise, using technical knowledge that impressed even Phoenix's skeptical team. "Your security protocols are actually stronger than most competitors," she concluded. "The breach occurred because someone with authorized access chose to commit a crime. No security system can prevent that, but we can implement monitoring that detects unusual data access patterns in real time." Phoenix leaned back in his chair, studying her with calculating eyes. "You're suggesting that working with Nimbus Corporation is actually safer now than it was before this incident?" "I'm suggesting that any company willing to sacrifice a 12-year partnership to expose fraud is exactly the kind of company you want handling your confidential information." The room fell silent. Naomi could hear her own heartbeat as Phoenix considered her words. "Counteroffer," Phoenix said finally. "We'll renew our contract at the original terms, plus a 20% increase for the enhanced security protocols you've outlined. And Ms. Carter," he smiled for the first time since she'd entered the room, "I want you personally overseeing our account." Walking out of Phoenix Financial with a $22 million contract felt like conquering Mount Everest. Cole was waiting in the lobby, pacing with nervous energy that evaporated the moment he saw her expression. "We got them," she announced. "Plus Sterling Tech called while I was presenting. They want a similar security briefing." Cole's response was immediate and overwhelming. He picked her up and spun her around the marble lobby, both of them laughing with relief and triumph. When he set her down, they were standing close enough that she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes. "You just saved my company," he said softly. "We saved it," she corrected. "Together." The word "together" hung between them, loaded with implications about their future, professional and personal. In the elegant lobby of Phoenix Financial, surrounded by the aftermath of corporate warfare, they looked at each other like two people who'd found something worth fighting for. Share your comeback stories below. When everything was on the line, how did you turn crisis into victory? But their celebration was interrupted by Cole's phone buzzing with a text that made his face go pale. "FBI raid in progress at Nimbus Corporation. Marcus has accused you and Ms. Carter of federal fraud." L'œil en route. As they rushed toward Cole's building, Naomi realized their victory had just become evidence in someone else's case. The war wasn't over. It was about to become a federal investigation that could destroy them both. She'd gone from interview candidate to federal suspect in 3 weeks, and the man she loved might be going down with her. When everything is on the line, who would you trust with your future? Have you ever had to choose loyalty over self-preservation? That's exactly what Naomi faced as FBI agents turned Cole's office into a crime scene and her love story into potential conspiracy charges. The federal building downtown looked like something from a Law and Order TV show. Intimidating marble, metal detectors, agents in suits who'd perfected the art of giving nothing away with their expressions. Naomi sat in an interview room that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams, staring at her reflection in what she assumed was a two-way mirror. Special Agent Rebecca Torres looked like she'd been born wearing a business suit. 40-something, sharp-eyed, with the kind of controlled intensity that made guilty people confess and innocent people nervous. She'd been questioning Naomi for 2 hours, circling the same topics like a hawk looking for weakness. "Let's go through this again, Ms. Carter. You discover alleged fraud during a job interview, expose the perpetrator publicly, begin a romantic relationship with the CEO, and within weeks you're personally managing the company's biggest client contracts." Agent Torres consulted her notes. "That's quite a rapid career advancement. I earned those opportunities." Naomi's voice stayed steady despite her exhaustion. "Everything I did was documented, witnessed, and legally compliant, including the romantic relationship." The question hit like a physical blow. "My personal feelings aren't federal crimes. They're when they're part of a conspiracy to commit securities fraud." Torres leaned forward, her expression predatory. "Marcus Whitman claims you and Cole Matthews orchestrated this entire situation. The fake fraud accusations, the manufactured evidence, the media manipulation, all designed to eliminate him and install you in a position of power. That's not what happened. Then explain Cole Matthews paying your mother's medical bills. Explain how a state school graduate with no corporate experience suddenly becomes the company's client relations expert. Explain how convenient it is that every piece of evidence supporting your claims comes from sources you and Matthews control." Each accusation felt like being hit with hammers. Naomi could see how their story looked from the outside. Too coincidental, too favorable, too much like a conspiracy designed to benefit them both. "The medical bills were paid before I ever met Cole," she said carefully. "His charitable giving is documented and audited. My qualifications speak for themselves." "Do they?" Torres pulled out a file folder. "Because we've been investigating your background, Ms. Carter. Interesting financial history. Multiple jobs, significant debt, mother's expensive medical treatments. The kind of desperate situation that might motivate someone to commit fraud for financial relief. The character assassination was systematic and brutal. Every struggle she'd overcome, every sacrifice she'd made, every night she'd worked double shifts to pay for her mother's care, all of it twisted into evidence of criminal motivation. I didn't commit fraud. I exposed it, according to you and Cole Matthews. But Marcus Whitman tells a different story." For the next hour, Torres presented Marcus's version of events. Naomi as a corporate spy, planted in the interview process to eliminate qualified candidates. Cole as a corrupt CEO using his position to manipulate investigations and reward personal relationships. Their romance as calculated performance designed to justify suspicious behavior. It was lies wrapped in enough truth to sound believable. "Marcus is trying to avoid federal charges by shifting blame," Naomi said when Torres finally paused. "Everything he's telling you can be disproven with independent evidence." "What independent evidence?" "The audio recordings made by Cole Matthews? The financial records controlled by Cole Matthews? The technical analysis provided by your cousin?" Torres's smile was sharp. "Everyone supporting your story has personal or professional connections to you or Matthews." The logic trap was perfect. Every piece of evidence that proved their innocence could be dismissed as collaboration between co-conspirators. Every witness who supported them could be painted as biased or compromised. "I want to make you an offer, Ms. Carter." Torres leaned back in her chair, projecting false casualness. "Testify that Cole Matthews pressured you to make false fraud accusations, and we'll recommend minimal charges. You could be back home in Birmingham within 6 months. And if I refuse, then you face the same conspiracy charges as Matthews. Federal prison, permanent criminal record, complete destruction of any future career prospects." Torres let that sink in. "Your mother needs ongoing medical care, doesn't she? Hard to provide that from a federal penitentiary." The threat was clear: betray Cole or lose everything. Exactly the kind of impossible choice that had defined her entire life. But as Naomi sat in that sterile interview room, surrounded by agents trying to force her to destroy the man she loved, she realized something that gave her strength. She'd already made this choice once before. In David Whitman's coffee shop, when he'd offered to solve all her problems in exchange for her integrity. "I need to call my lawyer," she said quietly. 3 hours later, Naomi sat in another conference room, this one in an expensive law firm with views of Atlanta's skyline. Cole was there too, looking like he'd aged years since morning. His usual composure was cracked, replaced by raw worry that had nothing to do with legal charges and everything to do with her. "They offered you a deal," he said. "It wasn't a question. They offered me a chance to save myself by destroying you." She met his eyes across the polished table. "I told them to call my lawyer." Something shifted in Cole's expression: relief, gratitude, and something deeper that made her chest tighten with emotion. "Naomi, if the evidence against us is strong enough." "It's not." She cut him off with absolute certainty. "Because we didn't do anything wrong. The truth doesn't change just because someone's trying to weaponize it against us." Their lawyer, Margaret Walsh, looked up from legal documents scattered across the table. "The FBI's case relies entirely on Marcus Whitman's testimony and circumstantial evidence. If we can prove he's lying." "We can't," Cole said firmly. "Every financial transaction is documented. Every business decision is recorded. Every piece of evidence we presented is verifiable through independent sources." "Then why are they moving forward with charges?" Cole's expression darkened. "Because someone with serious political connections wants this case to succeed." The implications hit the room like cold water. This wasn't just about corporate fraud anymore. This was about power, influence, and people wealthy enough to manipulate federal investigations for personal revenge. "David Whitman has friends in Washington," Cole continued. "The kind of friends who can suggest that ambitious federal prosecutors should take high-profile cases seriously. Share your thoughts below about standing by someone when the world is against them. What does loyalty mean when everything is at stake?" As they prepared their legal defense, Naomi realized they weren't just fighting criminal charges. They were fighting a system designed to protect people like David Whitman and destroy people like her. But looking at Cole across that conference table, seeing his determination to protect her even when it might cost him everything, she knew they'd face whatever came next together. The FBI might have federal power, but they had something stronger: the truth, and 2 people willing to risk everything to defend it. When the FBI led David away in handcuffs, he turned to Cole with a smile that chilled the blood. "You think you've won? Wait until you see what I've arranged for your precious company's IPO tomorrow." This was never about Marcus. It was about destroying everything you've built. The IPO that was supposed to make Cole a legend was about to become the scandal that destroyed him. Unless the girl with cracked shoes could work one more miracle. What does true partnership look like to you? When someone believes in your potential before you do, how does it change your life? That's what Naomi discovered as she stood in the New York Stock Exchange at 6 a.m., preparing to either save Cole's empire or watch it crumble on live television. The trading floor buzzed with pre-market energy. Hundreds of people in expensive suits shouting into phones, computer screens flashing red and green numbers, the controlled chaos of billions of dollars changing hands every second. Above it all, massive screens displayed Nimbus Corporation's IPO information, waiting for 9:30 a.m. when Cole's company would either soar or crash in front of the entire financial world. "Nervous?" Cole asked, adjusting his tie for the fifth time in 10 minutes. Terrified, Naomi replied honestly. She wore a navy blue dress she'd borrowed from Cole's assistant, shoes that actually match her outfit for once, and the kind of confidence that comes from having already lost everything worth losing. But also excited. They stood together at the edge of organized financial chaos, two people who'd fallen in love during corporate warfare and were about to discover if their partnership could survive public success. The FBI investigation had ended 3 days ago when Marcus's lies finally collapsed under the weight of contradictory evidence. David was facing federal charges, but his final threat still hung over them like storm clouds. Ladies and gentlemen, the exchange official announced, prepare for Nimbus Corporation's initial public offering. Cole reached for Naomi's hand, squeezing gently. Whatever happens in the next few hours, I want you to know something. What? You saved this company, not just from Marcus's fraud or David's manipulation, but from becoming the kind of business that puts profit over people. His voice carried the intensity that had first attracted her in that boardroom weeks ago. You made us better. Before she could respond, the opening bell rang across the trading floor. Nimbus Corporation was officially public, its stock price displayed on screens watched by investors around the world. The first hour was everything they dreamed. Stock price climbing steadily, trading volume indicating serious investor interest, financial news networks praising Cole's leadership and the company's growth potential. Naomi watched the numbers rise with amazement. This was actually happening. Then David's final bomb exploded. Breaking news, the CNBC anchor announced. Federal investigators are questioning the timing of Nimbus Corporation's IPO following allegations of insider trading and market manipulation by company executives. The stock price dropped like a rock thrown off a cliff. Trading volume spiked as investors panicked, selling shares they'd bought hours earlier. Cole's face went white as he watched 12 years of work evaporate in real time. Ow, he asked, but Naomi was already pulling out her phone. David leaked false information to financial reporters, she said, scrolling through breaking news alerts. Anonymous sources claiming you manipulated the IPO timing to avoid fraud charges. Market manipulation allegations. Insider trading accusations. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter in the first hours of stock market panic. Perception was reality, and perception said Nimbus Corporation was toxic. We have to respond, Cole said, but his voice carried defeat. Hold a press conference, present evidence, fight back. No. Naomi's certainty surprised them both. We do something better. She walked to the NYSE podium where Cole was scheduled to ring the closing bell, if there was still a company left to celebrate by then. But instead of waiting for disaster, she took control of the narrative. Ladies and gentlemen of the financial press, she announced, her voice carrying across the trading floor. My name is Naomi Carter, Chief Operations Officer of Nimbus Corporation. I'm here to address the false allegations being spread by a disgraced former business partner facing federal charges. Camera crews rushed toward her, drawn by the unexpected press conference. Cole stood frozen, watching the woman he loved step into the spotlight to defend their company. 3 weeks ago, I was a job candidate with cracked shoes and a thrift store interview outfit, Naomi continued. Today, I'm addressing the New York Stock Exchange because merit still matters more than connections, and truth still beats lies, even when powerful people try to destroy companies they can't control. She told their story with clarity and conviction. The fraud investigation, Marcus's manipulation, David's desperate attempts to maintain family control over a public company. Every fact documented, every accusation supported by evidence, every lie exposed with precision that left no room for doubt. David Whitman promised to destroy this company if he couldn't control it, she concluded. His false allegations today are proof that desperate people will say anything to avoid accountability. But Nimbus Corporation wasn't built by people who run from fights. It was built by people who face challenges head-on. The press conference lasted 45 minutes. By the time she finished, the stock price had not only recovered, but was climbing higher than it had opened. Investors were buying shares based on confidence in leadership that could handle crisis with transparency and strength. Cole walked to the podium as trading closed, looking at Naomi with an expression that made her heart race. Ms. Carter just demonstrated why she's not only our COO, but my partner in every sense of the word. The statement sent ripples through the financial press. Partner, professional and personal, business and romantic, present and future. Are you announcing an engagement? A reporter called out. Cole looked at Naomi, his eyes asking permission for something that should have been private, but was becoming beautifully public. I'm announcing that the woman who saved our company has also saved my life, he replied. And I'm hoping she'll let me spend the rest of it proving worthy of both gifts. The proposal wasn't on bended knee with a ring. It was standing at the podium of the New York Stock Exchange, surrounded by cameras and financial chaos, witnessed by the world that had tried to destroy them. Share your transformation stories below. When someone saw your worth before you believed in it yourself, how did it change your life? Naomi's answer was broadcast live to financial networks around the globe. Yes, but only if you promise we'll keep building companies that put people first. As they cut the ribbon on their new Atlanta headquarters 6 months later, the largest Black-owned tech company in the South, Naomi felt Cole's baby kick for the first time. But it was his whispered words that made her heart race. Ready to change the world together, Mrs. Matthews? She built an empire from an interview room, but the news she carried would create a legacy that no boardroom could contain. How do you balance career ambitions with personal dreams? What would you do if you could rewrite the rules about having it all? That's exactly what Naomi faced as she stood in the executive bathroom of Nimbus Corporation, staring at a pregnancy test that would change everything again. 2 pink lines, clear as daylight, undeniable as mathematics. She was pregnant. The timing was insane. The company had gone public 6 months ago and was expanding faster than they'd ever imagined. 3 new office locations, partnerships with Fortune 500 companies, and a client list that read like a who's who of American business. She was finally living the career she'd dreamed of since college, and now biology was adding complications she hadn't planned for. A knock on the bathroom door made her jump. Naomi, you okay in there? Cole's voice carried concern that made her chest tighten with emotion. Just a minute, she called back, shoving the pregnancy test into her purse with shaking hands. They had a board meeting in 20 minutes to discuss international expansion. Investors were flying in from 3 countries to hear their 5-year growth plan. This was exactly the wrong time for personal news that would overshadow professional achievements. But as she looked at herself in the mirror, successful executive, respected leader, woman who'd proven that cracked shoes didn't determine worth, she realized there was never a perfect time for the best things in life. Ready for the biggest presentation of our careers? Cole asked when she emerged from the bathroom. About that, she took his hand, leading him into his private office where they could talk without interruption. There's something I need to tell you first. Cole's expression shifted to immediate concern. What's wrong? Are you okay? I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them like bridge cables, strong enough to support their future or dangerous enough to send them crashing. Cole's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, joy, worry, and finally something that looked like wonder. Pregnant, he repeated, like testing the word's weight. We're having a baby. We're having a baby, she confirmed, watching his reaction carefully. I know the timing is complicated with the expansion and... Cole cut her off by kissing her with an intensity that erased every worry about timing and complications. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his hands were already moving protectively to her still flat stomach. This is perfect, he whispered against her forehead. Not the timing. That's terrible. But you, me, building a family while we build a business empire? That's perfect. Relief flooded through her chest. She'd been worried about his reaction, about the board's response, about investors' concerns regarding pregnant executives. But Cole's immediate joy reminded her why she'd fallen for him in the first place. He saw opportunities where others saw problems. What do we tell the board? She asked. The truth. That our COO is pregnant and brilliant and perfectly capable of managing international expansion while growing our future heir. Cole's smile was radiant. But first, we celebrate privately. The celebration was interrupted by his assistant knocking urgently. Mr. Matthews, the international investors, just arrived early. They're requesting an immediate preliminary meeting. Cole looked at Naomi with an expression that mixed excitement with apology. Rain check on the private celebration? Rain check, she agreed. Let's go show them why Nimbus Corporation is worth their investment. The boardroom filled quickly with representatives from London, Tokyo, and Berlin. Serious people in expensive suits who'd flown thousands of miles to evaluate whether Cole's company was ready for global markets. At the head of the table sat Heinrich Müller, whose German investment firm controlled billions in European tech funding. Mr. Matthews, Ms. Carter, Müller began in accented English. We're impressed with your domestic success. But international expansion requires different capabilities. Cultural sensitivity, regulatory compliance, operational flexibility. Are you prepared for such challenges? Cole started to respond, but Naomi touched his arm gently, a signal they developed during months of working together. He nodded, deferring to her expertise. Mr. Müller, international expansion isn't just about adapting our technology for different markets, Naomi said, standing to address the room. It's about understanding that innovation looks different in different cultures and building systems that celebrate those differences rather than trying to eliminate them. For the next 90 minutes, she presented a comprehensive analysis of global tech markets, regulatory environments, and cultural considerations that impressed even the skeptical international investors. She spoke about the London market's focus on financial technology, Tokyo's emphasis on manufacturing integration, Berlin's environmental sustainability requirements. You've clearly done extensive research, Müller acknowledged when she finished. But research and execution are different challenges. How do we know Nimbus Corporation can deliver on these ambitious plans? Because we've already proven we can adapt and overcome, Naomi replied. 6 months ago, we were fighting false fraud allegations and federal investigations. Today, we're presenting international expansion plans to investors from 3 continents. Growth through adversity isn't just our business model. It's our company DNA. The room fell silent as investors processed her words. Then Müller smiled for the first time since arriving. Ms. Carter, that may be the most honest assessment of corporate resilience I've heard in 20 years of investing. He looked around the table at his colleagues. Nimbus Corporation clearly has leadership capable of handling whatever challenges international markets present. After the investors left, with signed agreements for expansion funding, Cole found Naomi in the break room, finally eating the lunch she'd skipped during presentations. You were incredible in there, he said, sitting beside her on the couch that had become their informal meeting space. Pregnant and brilliant and completely unstoppable. Just brilliant, she corrected with a smile. The pregnancy is still our secret until we figure out timing. About that, Cole pulled out his phone, showing her a calendar app. What if we announce it next month at the company holiday party? Everyone will be celebrating anyway, and it gives us time to plan how we want to handle maternity leave and transition responsibilities. The thoughtfulness of his suggestion hit her right in the heart. He wasn't just thinking about their personal happiness. He was thinking about her career, her professional reputation, her need to maintain leadership credibility during pregnancy. You really think the board will be okay with a pregnant COO managing international expansion? She asked. I think the board will be thrilled that their COO is committed enough to the company's future to literally invest her genetic material in it. Cole's joke made her laugh despite her worries. Besides, if anyone questions your capabilities based on pregnancy, they'll have to deal with me. The protective intensity in his voice sent familiar electricity through her chest. Even after months of marriage and business partnership, Cole's fierce loyalty still made her pulse race. What does partnership mean when you're building both a business and a family? Share your thoughts about balancing professional and personal dreams. That evening, as they walked through their favorite Atlanta restaurant, the same place where paparazzi had photographed their scandalous dinner months earlier, Naomi realized how completely her life had transformed. From desperate job candidate to pregnant executive, from cracked shoes to corner office, from anonymous struggle to public success. But the most important transformation was the simplest, from alone to partnered, from surviving to thriving, from wondering if she was worth loving to knowing she was worth everything. "I have something for you," Cole said as they reached their table. "It's not my birthday. It's better than your birthday. It's the day our baby became real." He handed her a small wrapped box that made her heart skip. "Open it." Inside was a locket, simple, elegant, engraved with coordinates that made her eyes fill with tears. "The latitude and longitude of the interview room where we met," Cole explained. "Where everything started." As Naomi fastened the locket around her neck, she realized they weren't just celebrating pregnancy. They were celebrating the fact that sometimes the most important journeys begin with someone seeing your worth before you even know they're watching. 6 months later, as they prepared for the biggest presentation of her career, announcing their joint venture with 3 Fortune 500 companies, she realized there was something else she needed to tell Cole. Something that would change their partnership in ways neither expected. The girl who walked into that interview with cracked shoes now stood in custom Louboutins, cutting the ribbon on a tech empire. But her greatest achievement was sleeping in the stroller beside her. So what would you do if someone saw your worth before you believed it yourself? Would you run? Or would you build something that lasts? That's the question Naomi asked herself as she looked out over the crowd gathered for Nimbus Corporation's 5th anniversary celebration. The company headquarters stretched across 3 blocks of downtown Atlanta, glass and steel towers that reflected Georgia's sunshine and represented thousands of jobs, millions in economic impact, and proof that merit could beat privilege when given the chance. 5 years ago, she'd been a desperate job candidate. Today, she was CEO of the fastest-growing tech company in the Southeast. "Mama, look!" 4-year-old David Cole Matthews pointed excitedly at the banner hanging across the building's main entrance. Nimbus Corporation, 5 years of innovation, integrity, and inclusion. "I see it, baby," Naomi replied, adjusting his tiny suit tie. He looked like a miniature version of his father, but with her stubborn determination already showing in his dark eyes. Cole appeared beside them, carrying their 6-month-old daughter Sarah, who was chewing contentedly on her fingers and drooling on his expensive suit jacket. He looked completely unbothered by the baby damage to his wardrobe. Fatherhood had mellowed his perfectionist tendencies in the best possible ways. "Ready for your speech?" he asked, bouncing Sarah gently. As ready as anyone can be for explaining how cracked shoes changed an empire. Naomi smiled, but her hands trembled slightly. Speaking to employees and investors was routine now, but today's audience included people whose lives she'd accidentally changed by refusing to stay quiet about fraud. The crowd gathered in the company's main atrium included everyone from senior executives to maintenance staff, because Cole had insisted that success should be celebrated by everyone who'd contributed to it. Naomi spotted familiar faces. Margaret Chen from the original board, Keisha, who'd exposed Marcus's audio manipulation, Phoenix Financial CEO, who'd become their biggest advocate. "Before I begin," Naomi announced from the small stage, "I want to acknowledge some special guests. Marcus Whitman couldn't be here today because he's serving 18 months in federal prison for securities fraud. David Whitman also sends his regrets from the minimum security facility where he's completing his sentence for conspiracy and attempted bribery." The crowd's laughter was warm but sharp. Justice served with a side of satisfaction. 5 years ago, I walked into a job interview wearing thrift store clothes and cracked shoes, carrying nothing but determination and my grandmother's lucky pen. I thought the worst thing that could happen was not getting the job. She paused, looking at Cole. I was wrong. The worst thing would have been getting it by staying silent about fraud. She told the story they all knew but never tired of hearing. The girl who'd exposed corruption, fought federal investigation, survived corporate warfare, and built an empire based on a radical idea that doing the right thing mattered more than making easy money. Today, Nimbus Corporation employs over 8,000 people across 12 countries. We've revolutionized artificial intelligence applications in healthcare, education, and environmental protection. Our charitable foundation has paid medical bills for over 50,000 families. Our scholarship program has sent 2,000 first-generation college students to universities they couldn't afford. The statistics represented lives changed, dreams realized, systemic barriers broken down one family at a time. But Naomi's favorite number was simpler: zero. 0 employees had ever been asked to compromise their integrity for company success. But our greatest achievement isn't measured in profits or stock prices, she continued, her voice softening as she looked at her children. It's proof that when you build companies that put people first, those people build legacies that last generations. She gestured toward a wall display showing photos from their various charitable initiatives: the Children's Hospital Wing funded by anonymous donations, the Community College Technology Center, the Medical Debt Relief Program that had grown from Cole's personal project into a national movement. The Cracked Shoes Foundation has become our signature program, Naomi announced. Every year, we provide full scholarships, mentorship, and job placement assistance to 50 candidates who might not get opportunities based on traditional credentials. Because talent doesn't require pedigree, and potential shouldn't depend on privilege. The applause was thunderous, but Naomi was watching Cole's expression as she delivered the surprise she'd been planning for months. This year, I'm announcing an expansion of that program. The David Cole Matthews Innovation Center will provide full funding for 500 scholarship recipients annually, along with startup incubation for their business ideas and mentorship from successful entrepreneurs. She smiled as Cole's eyes widened with shock, because sometimes the best way to honor someone is to multiply their impact. Cole handed Sarah to his assistant and joined Naomi on stage, his expression cycling through surprise, pride, and something deeper that made her heart race after 5 years of marriage. "You named it after our son?" he asked softly. "I named it after the future we're building for him," she corrected. "A world where opportunity depends on merit instead of money, where cracked shoes don't disqualify brilliance, where doing the right thing gets rewarded instead of punished." Cole's response was to kiss her right there on stage, in front of 8,000 employees and dozens of cameras. It was the kind of spontaneous, genuine moment that would make headlines in business magazines and remind everyone watching that success stories could also be love stories. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Cole took the microphone. 5 years ago, the most qualified candidate walked into our interview room. She just happened to be wearing cracked shoes and carrying a thrift store bag. Today, she's not just my wife and business partner. She's proof that when you recognize excellence regardless of packaging, you don't just hire an employee. You find a soulmate. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Naomi was focused on their children. David was clapping enthusiastically, not understanding the business implications, but knowing his parents were happy. Sarah was reaching for the microphone, more interested in the shiny object than the corporate celebration. "Before we close," Naomi said, "I have one more announcement, something I've never shared publicly, but which explains everything about how we built this company." The crowd quieted, sensing something important. The day I walked into that interview, my mother was dying of cancer. Her medical bills totaled over $300,000. Money I'd never have, treatments we couldn't afford. I was desperate enough to consider things that would have compromised my integrity. She paused, feeling the weight of that old desperation. But 3 months before I ever met Cole, someone had already paid those bills. An anonymous donor who believed my mother deserved health care regardless of our ability to pay. She looked at Cole, whose cheeks were flushing with embarrassment at having his secret generosity exposed. I didn't know it then, but the man I'd fallen in love with had already been taking care of my family. Not because he wanted something from me, but because he believed suffering was unacceptable when resources existed to prevent it. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice stayed strong. That's the values foundation of this company. That's why every policy, every decision, every expansion is filtered through one question: does this help people or hurt them? The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. But Naomi wasn't focused on the applause. She was watching Cole's expression, seeing the man who'd quietly changed thousands of lives finally getting credit for the compassion that had built their empire. After the celebration, They found themselves alone in Cole's office. Now our office, since they combined their executive spaces when Sarah was born. Atlanta's skyline stretched beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, the same view where they planned their first crisis response 5 years earlier. You didn't have to tell them about the medical bills, Cole said, loosening his tie with movements that still made her pulse quicken after years of marriage. Yes, I did. Naomi kicked off her designer shoes. Custom-made now. But she kept her first pair of cracked flats in a frame on her desk as a reminder of how far they traveled. Because the story isn't complete without acknowledging that sometimes love happens before you know you're falling. Cole moved closer, that familiar intensity in his dark eyes. You mean when I saw your application and decided to help your mother? I mean when you saw a problem and decided to solve it, regardless of personal benefit. That's who you are, Cole. That's who you've always been. She reached up to touch his face, marveling that she got to call this remarkable man hers. And that's what our children will inherit. Not just money, but the understanding that privilege is responsibility. Their intimate moment was interrupted by David calling from the outer office. Mama, Daddy, Sarah's eating paper. They rushed out to find their daughter happily destroying important-looking documents while their son watched with scientific fascination. It was chaos, expensive chaos, but it was theirs. This is our legacy, Naomi said, scooping up Sarah while Cole rescued what remained of quarterly reports. Not the buildings or the stock prices, but them. And what we teach them about using success to lift others instead of stepping on them. Cole looked at their beautiful, expensive, chaotic life and smiled with contentment. Think they'll be impressed that their mother conquered corporate America in cracked shoes? I think they'll be more impressed that their parents chose each other over easy money, truth over convenient lies, and building something meaningful over just building wealth. As they gathered their children and prepared to leave the office, CEO and chairman heading home to suburban normalcy, Naomi realized the girl with cracked shoes had gotten everything she'd never dared to dream. A career that mattered, a love that lasted, children who would inherit values along with wealth, and proof that integrity could build empires just as surely as corruption could destroy them. Ready to go home, Mrs. Matthews? Cole asked, carrying Sarah while David held his mother's hand. Ready, Mr. Matthews, she replied, but she was thinking about all the women who would read their story, all the candidates who would interview for impossible jobs, all the people who would face moments when doing right meant risking everything. Comment below with what you would have done in her shoes. When someone offers you everything you need but asks you to compromise your integrity, what you choose. And remember, sometimes the most powerful love doesn't rescue you from your life. It recognizes the strength that's been there all along. If this story of turning cracked shoes into corporate crowns inspired you, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories that prove merit beats privilege every time. Tell me in the comments, what's your cracked shoes moment that led to something bigger? And remember, the person who doesn't fit the mold is exactly who the world needs to break it. Because sometimes the best love stories start with someone seeing your worth before you even know they're watching. And sometimes the most important interviews are the ones that change your life in ways you never expected.